Let's begin with a question that feels like a trap. How often do you stay in silent in a meeting because you don't want to be the negative person? How often do you give soft feedback because you're afraid of hurting someone's feelings? How often do you choose comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth? In leadership, we call this being people oriented. We call it culture first. We tell ourselves we are protecting the harmony of the team. But if we are honest, there is a much more clinical name for it: pathological niceness. It is the subconscious belief that harmony is more important than honesty. It is a survival mechanism disguised as a virtue. The problem is, when you prioritize niceness over clarity, you aren't protecting your team. You are protecting your own ego. You are protecting your need to be perceived as the good guy. Stay with me until the end of this episode. We are going to deconstruct completely the difference between being nice and being kind. Explore why a nice culture is actually a breeding ground for systemic mediocrity. And I'll share a story about a time my own fear of an uncomfortable truth actually cost 6 months of a colleague on their career. Hello, everyone. This is João, and you are listening or watching to the H2H experiment. Welcome back again. To understand the cost of niceness, we have to look at the philosophy of the mask. Niceness is a social lubricant. It's the set of manners we use to navigate the grocery store or cocktail party without friction. It's designed to keep things moving on the surface level. But leadership is not about the surface at all. Leadership is about growth, and growth by definition requires friction. Immanuel Kant spoke about the categorical imperative, the idea that we should act according to rules that we will want to see become universal laws. If your universal law is never make anyone uncomfortable, you have effectively outlawed progress. You have made it impossible for a team to evolve because evolution requires the death of the old, inefficient ideas. When you are nice, you are focusing on the atmospheric pressure of the room. You are managing the temperature to make sure no one sweats. When you are kind, you are focusing on the soul of the work. You are managing the trajectory of the person. Niceness is a facade of virtue that often masks a profound lack of courage. It is, at its core, a form of intellectual and emotional dishonesty. You are withholding the very data the other person needs to succeed simply because you don't want to feel the weight of their reaction. Psychologically, pathological niceness is rooted in deep-seated conflict avoidance and fear of rejection. Many leaders carry what I call the ghost of conflict from their past. Perhaps you grew up in a home where disagreement meant an explosion, or perhaps you've internalized the modern corporate myth that being tough makes you a bad person. So you overcompensate. You avoid the hard performance review. You let the underperformance slide, hoping they will get it through osmosis, maybe. You sugarcoat the reality of a project's failure until the failure becomes catastrophic. But here's the H2H truth about it. Unspoken words do not disappear. They turn into resentment, and that's a fact. Every time you play nice, instead of being clear, you are planting a seed of resentment. When you don't address the issue doesn't evaporate. It just moves underground. It manifests as passive aggression, as side conversations in the hallway, and as a slow, toxic erosion of psychological safety. True safety doesn't come from a leader who is always smiling. It comes from a leader who's brave enough to tell you exactly where you stand. We often think of toxic cultures as aggressive, loud, demanding, but there is a second one, more insidious type of toxicity, the culture of polite silence. This is the hardest part for nice organizations to hear. Listen to this. A culture that values harmony over truth is a culture that breeds mediocrity. I'll say it again. A culture that values harmony over truth is a culture that breeds mediocrity. In a nice culture, several things happen simultaneously. One, bad ideas are given life support. No one wants to hurt the feelings of the person who proposed a flawed strategy. So the team spends months chasing a ghost that everybody knows is not going to work. Two, high performance, they quit. A players, they want to be challenged. They want to work with other A players. When they see a nice leader tolerating low standards for the sake of peace, they lose respect for the mission and they leave. And three, innovation dies. Innovation requires the collision of opposing ideas. It requires someone to say, I think you're wrong, and here's why. In a nice culture, those collisions are seen as not being a team player. Niceness is the silent killer of excellence. It creates a polite environment where everyone is nodding in agreement while the ship is slowly taking on water, because no one is willing to be the person who points at the leak. Now, let me share a bit of my personal experience on this. I remember a time earlier in my career when I had a team member who was clearly drowning. His work was slipping. Deadlines were being missed, and the rest of the team was starting to pick up the slack. I knew I needed to have a level setting conversation, or as I like to call, adjusting feedback conversation. I had the notes, I had the data, but I really liked the person. I knew they were going through a tough time personally. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I wanted to be the human, supportive leader. My intentions, they were genuine. So I stayed nice. I gave vague feedback. I told him he was doing okay, but just to keep an eye on the details. I used the famous sandwich method of feedback, hiding the truth between two slices of empty praise. I hoped he would see the hint and course correct on his own. He didn't. Of course, he didn't. He couldn't, because I hadn't actually told him what was wrong in a very clear manner. 6 months later, things started collapsing, obviously. When I finally had to let that person go, he looked at me with genuine betrayal and said, Why didn't you tell me this 6 months ago? We could have fixed it. Now it's too late. In that moment, the mirror was turned back on me. My silence, my vagueness wasn't for his benefit. It was for mine. I didn't want to feel the knot in my stomach. I didn't want to deal with the tears or the defensiveness. My niceness had robbed him of his agency. It had misled him into thinking he was safe when actually he wasn't thin nice. My niceness was, in fact, the most cruel thing I could have done to him, and I learned my lesson. Now, just in the name of clarity, let's draw a definitive line in the sand here, exploring the difference between niceness and kindness. Niceness is about the giver, it's about how I feel, it's about maintaining my brand as a good person. It is a self-serving act of emotional cowardice. Kindness is about the receiver. It's about what they need to hear to reach their potential. If even if that truth is uncomfortable in the moment. Kindness requires the courage to be the villain in a 10-minute meeting so the other person can be a hero for the next 5 years of their career. As a leader, your job is not to be a friend. Your job is to be a mirror. A mirror doesn't apologize for showing you a smudge on your face or a flaw in your presentation. It just shows it to you. It gives you the gift of the truth so that you have the power to change it. When you withhold that truth, you are keeping that person powerless. All right, now let's move to my favorite part of the episode, the H2H experiment of the week. This one I call the Unspoken Truth Audit. This week, I wanted to look for the unspoken truth sitting in your office or in your inbox. Identify one conversation you have been avoiding, not because it is not important, but because you don't want to be that person. Before you step into the room, I want you to do a quick internal audit. Ask yourself, am I staying silent to protect them? Or am I staying silent because I'm afraid of how I'll feel afterwards? When you have that conversation, don't try to be tough. Just try to be clear. Lead with your H2H intentions. Say this: I am sharing this with you because I care about your success. And right now, your current path is not going to get you where you want to go. I believe you are capable of more. And that's why we need to talk about this. Watch what happens to the energy of the relationship. Most of the time, the other person won't be angry. They will be relieved. Because the only thing more stressful than hearing the truth is the constant underlying anxiety of not knowing where you stand. All right, now let's wrap up this episode. Being nice is easy. It's the path of least resistance. It requires zero courage and very little character. Being kind is hard. It requires the discipline to stay in the discomfort of the truth until that truth becomes a bridge to something better. Your team doesn't need a leader who always agrees with them or always makes them feel comfortable. They need a leader who believes in them enough to tell them the truth. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to continue the experiment. Follow our latest reflections and deep dives on LinkedIn and in our Substack community. Also, explore more H2H experiments and frameworks in our website, the h2hexperiment.com, or also our articles on the ECXO platform. And for the full roadmap of transforming your leadership from polite to powerful, check out the HX Revolution book series. We have 3 published. They are now available on Amazon. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the truth. And thank you for having the courage to be unpopular for the right reasons. Because the more you hide, the less they grow. Choose clarity over comfort. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.